Splash pads or interactive water features. This is one of those things that I hadn't seen one of these um, until probably, 2005, something like that, maybe a little bit before that. And I was up in Canada with my family, and there was a splash pad out in a park, and my kids just absolutely loved it. It was a pretty simple thing, but they absolutely loved it. And what we've seen around the state is we, as many of these as you install, they will be utilized beyond what you could ever expect. And so we wanted to talk about some safety issues and some risk issues associated with splash pads, or these interactive water features. That's the word, that's the term that's used as a general term around something that's like a splash pad or a play feature where water's allowed to run. This is a recirculating. Why did I bold the words in here? It means a recirculating water feature designed or installed to be used for recreational use, in which there is direct water contact from the feature with the public. And when not in operation, all water drains freely, so there is no ponding. Okay, that's from Utah Administrative Code. There is a specific rule about interactive water features. Now, we're going to remember that word recirculating as we go through the presentation, because that's a critical factor in decisions that we make around an interactive water feature. And I'm going to call them splash pads from here on out, just because that's a little easier. So let's just talk briefly about what a splash pad is and what they do. So splash pad, nice thing about it is they're basically zero water depth. There's no standing water for a kid to drown in. Even a small pond that's 6 inches deep, something like that, could be a drowning hazard for a child. But with a splash pad, it's designed that water basically runs off and it doesn't leave any ponding there, enough water for a child to drown. So it's much safer. We love swimming pools, but they're high risk. Doug, Brent, and myself are going out and doing our aquatic program visits this month. And we love pools, but there's a lot more risk that goes with a pool than a splash pad. These have become very interactive. So it's something that a child pushes a button or does something and they're able to interact. Some are on an automatic cycle. Some have become very intricate and are maybe geared a little bit more for older users than just really young children. So benefits of splash pads: we have a really low chance of drowning. Your risk is much less with this than a swimming pool or something similar. It requires minimal supervision. You can basically build this and go out and do inspections and check that everything's working okay. But you don't have to have lifeguards. You don't have to have a ton of staff there watching this. They're much cheaper to operate. They're much cheaper to build, and they're really cool. And the advice that I give to most of our members, all of our members, if they call and ask me about a splash pad, hey, what do you think about that? What do you think about the risk? One thing that I always tell our members when they ask about this is, look at your best estimate on what your usage will be, and then double it. Plan on doubling whatever your plans are, because these features get pounded. There will be a lot more people there than you think. Your parking lots will be overloaded. Your bathroom facilities will be overloaded because these are hyper popular and people really love those when the weather gets hot. You go into a park where there's a splash pad and a playground nearby, and the splash pad will be super busy and the playground not so much. So get ready for these things. Okay. Now, I like splash pads. I think they are great things, but they do have their risks. They do have hazards that we have to deal with, and so we have to go into it with our eyes open and plan for those types of risks. So let's go through, there's a whole list of those, and we'll hit each one of those independently. Number one, there is no national or international consensus standard on splash pads. And so many state governments have promulgated regulations around this, and they're generally placed in the same regulation as swimming pools. Some of the swimming pool regulations apply when we start talking about quality of water, and a few pool rules. Some apply, some are specifically excluded, and we'll talk about those. And there's a big long link there, but you can go online and just Google for interactive water feature and Utah into a Google search, and it'll pull up this Utah administrative code. Use networking. If you're building a splash pad for the first time, call other cities, call other organizations that have splash pads and say, what has your experience been? What's been really good and what's been terrible? And I'm sure they'd be willing to share that experience with you. All right, let's go through just some of the basic details of this and really go to the regulations. It's not very long, and you can pull out all of these things, but I wanted to talk about some things to keep in mind. There are some design details. This was a relatively recent change to the regulation that you have to be in consultation with your local health department prior to constructing a splash pad. Basically, we want to have a communication with them. And what I would do is I would, maybe initiate this with a phone call. If you don't get a lot of action out of them, I just document that with a letter, registered letter that we've asked them to do that. That's just a compliance thing. I want to talk with the health department to see if they have some input on how to make this as safe as we possibly can and as healthy as we possibly can. So the water supply needs to be culinary drinking water. Okay, it needs the original water coming in needs to be a drinking water standard. We should have a backflow preventer device on it. You probably dealt with these in other parts of that. There's some simple things, but things that we have to consider. They need to meet the specialty pool requirements for disinfection. So back to that standard, there is a section for specialty pools, and it says what type of disinfection that we have to the water when it's recirculating. Okay, and that brings us to the point of this big question. To discharge or not? That is the question. So if I just run this water through the system one time, so I take drinking water, quality water, and I run it through the system, and it goes to the drain, and then it goes to the sewer system, or it goes potentially to an irrigation system, but it doesn't recirculate through the system. Many of the regulations don't apply because in that initial definition, it said it has to be recirculating. Now, this is a big question because of a number of reasons. It's easy to not recirculate. It's easy to just discharge this water. Now, there's some downsides to discharging the water. One is we can look at that as, well, we're probably wasting a lot of water, particularly if it goes straight to the sewer system after being used in our splash pad. We live in a desert, and it's a very dry year, and so making that decision may have some negative side effects to it. So I just throw that out there, and you can bat around that question of whether we discharge or not. But if you recirculate, it becomes much more complicated, much more expensive, and takes a lot more staff to do that. So just go into it with your eyes open, knowing that we need to make this decision, and that probably will have some community input as well on what the community would prefer to see happen to the water. So in here, in the state reg, it says all parts of the interactive water feature shall be designed, constructed, maintained, and operated so there are no slip, fall, or other safety hazards. Well, I hate a regulation like that. It says no slip hazards, and we're going out there and we're spraying water onto a surface and saying, kids, go play. Well, I think that's almost an impossibility that we can say there are no slip, fall, or other safety hazards at that. But that should be our goal, is to eliminate those as much as we possibly can. So let's talk about slip, trip, fall hazards. Always look at the manufacturer's guidance. So most of these systems will come in. They're put together by a manufacturer, and they have certain designs. If you have a manufacturer's guidance, you've got to follow that, and go into discussion with the manufacturer or their rep about those things, and how they want things done, because that's an easy way to get into trouble, is to not follow what the manufacturer tells us to do. All right, so let's talk about the deck, the actual walking surface, play surface around there. Generally, these surfaces are made of a broom concrete or a crumbled rubber, that's a little kind of similar to the pour-in-place fall material at a playground. Not exactly the same, because it does shed water and it runs over it. And you ask yourself, well, what would we rather? Would we rather something that is kind of cushioned like this crumbled rubber product, or concrete? Well, my answer might surprise you. I would probably prefer the concrete surface. And you say, why? You're a risk manager. What is that? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. My experience on this is in watching children play on the rubberized surface compared to concrete. Children are a lot more likely to run and play a lot more vigorously on that rubberized surface, and probably are more likely to take falls. If they know it's concrete, they tend to temper their behavior a little bit, because it might hurt if I fall down. The other side of that is maintenance. If I've got a concrete surface out there, it's much easier to maintain. It's much easier to inspect and deal with problems than that rubberized surface. That being said, it's your choice. Just look at all of the standards there. If you do go with the rubberized surface, it needs to meet applicable ANSI standards. There's supposed to be a 3-foot concrete apron around the outside of that. It's basically a sidewalk around the outside of the splash pad. You need to have slope 2% or greater so the water runs off. And we need to document regular inspections. So we need to have our park staff go out there and look at it and ensure that it meets all of the requirements that we have, that there's no broken glass, there's no trash around, that the equipment is functioning properly, et cetera, et cetera. If we're recirculating that water, that the water treatment is in place, and that the readings that we take on that water meet the standards that we're looking for. We need to be able to close this facility when it's appropriate. If there's vandalism or damage that happens to the equipment, we're doing maintenance on it, we need an ability to close that facility and keep people out. All right. In siting our splash pad is probably one of the most critical things that we do when putting together our splash pad. Where do we put it? It's the old real estate adage: location, location, location. Don't put this splash pad right next to a gravel pit. And I say that jokingly, but it could be. Here's in this picture here. They had great intentions with this water feature, and it is really, really cool. It's lots of fun for the kids to play with. But they put gravel material in and around the area where this happens. What do children do with gravel or wood chips? If there's a playground, they're going to pick it up and they're going to haul it over and put it into the water feature, whether it's one like this where they just allow water to run, or it's a splash pad, and then you're going to have maintenance nightmares. So think about where you put this. So don't put a splash pad near Playgrounds that have wood chips or gravel, sand material, that kind of stuff. Don't put it close to electrical services. Look out for sharp objects, food consumption areas. Let's keep those away there, because then we're going to have a harder time keeping food and bottles or whatever it may be away from our feature. Keep it away from highways, rivers, etc. Now, I bring this one up because of a specific example where an organization was putting a splash pad in, and there was a creek that ran through the park. Well, what's this risk manager's concern about that? Well, my concern is I've got children there in bathing suits having fun playing in the water, and they look over at this river flowing through the park, and it's an easy transition to get from the splash pad to playing in that river and the potential for drowning kids. So this organization was really good. I said, hey, here are my concerns. What can we do about this? I didn't really like the idea of fencing, because fences can be defeated, and it kind of took away from the area. Well, what the organization did in consultation is they made it more challenging for kids to get to the river. We put in some crushed gravel, crushed rock that would be really hard on bare feet and discourage children from being close to these to the river or getting over to there. They did some plantings that would discourage people from getting close to the river. Anyway, that was after the fact. If I've got a choice, I'm going to put this splash pad someplace away from hazards. I don't want to put it next to the freeway where kids could wander onto the freeway or somewhere like that. Okay. Collision hazards. We want to post rules, and we'll talk specifically about what's required there, but we want to enforce that. Does that make our park staff the cops out there doing that? Well, unfortunately, we need to do some of that. And I would document that whenever we do. Went out and there were some challenges with kids running, and it could be a simple thing that they write down in a notebook that they keep. That helps us to show that we're being reasonable and prudent. If people bring things onto the splash pad that shouldn't be there, whether it be skateboard, rails or something like that, or something that goes along with the splash pad itself, take that stuff, invite people to remove that. Anything from outside is inappropriate there. It's designed how it is. And we need to document our efforts. Okay. Some of the things we have to look at are cuts and puncture hazards. I've got little kids running around with bare feet many times on this concrete surface. A piece of broken glass could be a real severe hazard to a child. So we want to have posted in our rules, no glass or foreign objects brought onto the splash pad. We want to inspect for that and periodically sweep the deck. And I said periodically, regularly. That may be a daily occurrence during the summer use time, that we've got people out there running a broom to pick up those sharp objects. Once again, document everything that we do. Sanitation. So when, well, there's some things beyond the water. One is we need to have restrooms and diaper changing facilities within 150 feet. This is part of the state law. So as you're citing that, remember that I've got to be within 150 feet of those restroom facilities, and I have to provide diaper changing facilities at the restroom there. Have a no pets rule posted and follow up on that. Fecal accident response protocol. Well, this gets closer to a swimming pool, in that if somebody has an accident out there on the splash pad, we've got to know how to handle that. And so we want to have a written protocol in place and train all of our staff on how to respond to that if something like that happens. In recirculating systems, you need to meet the chlorine limits. We talked about that. It's the specialty pool limits. They need to have not only just the chlorine system, but they also need to have a secondary ultraviolet sanitization system in there for cryptosporidium control. And so, this is not going to be a simple system. It's going to have two main means of sanitization, and those have to be maintained. And we have to have staff that is knowledgeable enough to be able to safely operate those systems and keep the water pH and other readings that we have within the appropriate limits. They should have a pH and an ORP, an oxidation reduction potential controller, and so it automatically will feed chemicals to balance that out. And your system needs to be able to provide a 30-minute treatment for all water. So it needs to be able to turn all that water over and treat it within 30 minutes, whatever's in the system. We don't necessarily have the bather load requirements that we see for swimming pools, but that would really be kind of my guide, would be look at what our potential maximum number of people is, and how much we can treat there. But this is the state requirement, is a 30-minute treatment for all of that water. Okay. The physical equipment out on the splash pad, the nozzles that squirt water out, they need to have a velocity of less than 20 feet per second. So what does that mean? Well, that's the velocity that it comes out. That's to prevent people from having their eyeballs shot out with this, or have this this nozzle squirt out water so rapidly that it could damage skin, those kinds of things. Nozzles should be flush with the ground and less than a half-inch diameter opening. That's so kids can't stick their fingers into there and you know, have their fingers get stuck in that nozzle. Other things that are up above ground, so if I've got buckets or things that drop that are not accessible by children, they can have different standards for that, and the volume of water and all of those things. But nozzles where children can access those need to meet this. All right, foggers and misters. In some places we may have fogger or mister to provide some relief from the heat in the area. These can't go through our recirculating system. These need to come directly from a potable water source. So I don't recirculate that, and that's really to help prevent some respiratory diseases that can come from that, particularly Legionella. Legionellosis is something that we can contract from recirculating water and then putting it up in the air in a form that we can breathe it. If it's operated at night, your splash pad needs to have light, and greater than 5-foot candles. Anyway, we can talk about details on that if you just specify that in. If we're putting lights in, they need to be away from, all electrical needs to be away from the water, but it needs to deliver this much amount of light. All right, and then some other hazards. This is a picture I took at a splash pad. And I ask you, what hazards do you see? These are lids on the tanks that the water goes into, and I believe in this situation there was some other equipment down there as well, but it's out in an open area. Well, here's some hazards that I see. One are trip hazards. You know, I would look at these and either secure them so people couldn't access that. Or I would have them flush to the ground. Now these have got locks in place, and so my advice to this member was to fence this area to prevent people from tripping on that. There's a lot of in your design phase that can really determine the challenges that I have. We've had some situations where children, and one good thing about this picture is you can see that these lids are white. Why is that better? Well, it really has to do with how hot these lids will get. We've had a couple of situations where children at a splash pad have had their bottoms burned by sitting down on a manhole lid that was a dark color, and they got really hot. And a child with, you know, in a bathing suit doesn't have a whole lot of protection, and if they're a toddler and they can't move really fast, they can get burned. And so Think about those things. Where do I put those? Do I secure those? Can I make sure that they're painted a lighter color so they don't get as hot as others? But also think about those little bare feet out there. What kind of hazards are potentially there, and how do we limit kids getting their feet cut up? Other things, investigate. If you're looking at putting in a specific splash pad and somebody else has it, go to that city, go to that splash pad and look at it and say, okay, what might the problems be? This is one I took a picture years ago. It wasn't terrible, but this little cannon, water cannon, had a really nasty pinch point. And so if a child had a hold of that and another child started raising and lowering it, you could have a crushed finger or crushed hand. Kind of a simple thing, but let's look at those and say, how do we make this as safe as we can for the children? And maybe if there wasn't a good design way to handle this one, we buy a different one. Okay. And just anticipate the challenges that you might have. Realize that we have to do, even though this is a lot less maintenance than a swimming pool, there's a ton of maintenance that goes along with a splash pad. All right, signage. So the items in red are called out in the state code to tell us these are required. So our signs need to have these, and then I have some others that I think should be there as well. So caution at the top of sign: no running on or around. Children under 12 must have adult supervision. No food, drink, or glass or pets allowed on or around. For the health of all users, restrooms shall be used for changing of diapers. Okay, pretty standard stuff. Some other things I would put on there. This is unsupervised, and you may even put no lifeguard on duty to let people know that they're on their own out there with this water feature. The hours of operation that let people know that this is not potable water. This is recirculating. It's just like the swimming pool water. I don't want to get that stuff in my mouth, and I really don't want to drink it. And then prohibiting other uses like skateboarding. A couple of things to think about. If we are putting in a recirculating system, we're going to be adding chemicals. We're going to have lots of equipment. There's electrical service. This is pretty risky work that we're going to have them doing. A lot of hazards involved. If I mix acids and bleach together, which I'm going to have both of those because I'm balancing the pH and I'm also adding bleach for chlorination, I can create chlorine gas if I don't do things right, and that could hurt a lot of people. The vaults that we're working in are confined spaces and can be really hazardous to our people. So as you look at this, I would ask myself, do I want to throw this to our park staff? And you got to ask yourself a question: are park staff trained up to this level to be able to do confined space entry? Are they trained up to do the mechanical maintenance on that? You may consider having your public works staff or your water department staff or whoever is trained up on this type of work to maintain that part of your system. Anyway, just go into it with your eyes open and feel free to call and ask me questions about this. We're happy to help out. Confined spaces, that's a big deal. There's a lot of training involved and a lot of equipment, gas detection, all kinds of stuff. So there's some significant costs. Significant training involved. Call us and give us a shout on that. We'd be happy to help out. All right. In summary, this is my daughter. It was quite a while ago. She's turning 16 this year, so that was a while ago when she was out at this splash pad in Canada, and she loved it, as did the rest of the kids. Splash pads are awesome. They are a fun thing, but there are risks involved. Go into it with your eyes wide open at some of the possible pitfalls that we might need. I added this line this morning. Keep it simple. Um, I see sometimes we're putting in lots of stuff. These don't, these are going to draw a lot of people, however they are. Make it easy on your maintenance staff. Make it safe by not making it too complicated. Simple, simple jets and nozzles that are at ground level. Kids love it, and it doesn't have to be too intricate, too detailed. It can be simple and still be really fun and make your life much easier and actually make it safer for the kids that are out there. Go into it with your eyes wide open, put in good policies, procedures, train your staff up on how to do this. And we're going to have an awesome feature for our communities and the communities around us, because when you build it, they definitely will come, and you will have more people than you ever anticipated would come to your park to participate in this. So be ready and be prepared, and please give us a call, talk to your health department. There are lots of people out there who can help out in doing this the right way and safely. All right, that's the summary. Doug and Brent, do we have any questions? I didn't have my Q&A up.
Oh, there was one comment about lots of stub toes on splash pads.
Yeah, you know, you think about that. I mean, it kind of makes me cringe. I'm not a guy that goes barefoot very much, and you think about getting your feet wet, and then running out on the splash pad. Stub toes are going to happen on concrete just because you know, people moving around like that. But let's not create hazards of those for those stub toes. So once again, as we look about how we're building it, how do we minimize the chance of impact with people, whether it's toes or they run into things? I like a nice flat splash pad with jets, with nozzles that shoot up in the air, because there's not much for people to run into. There's very little maintenance concerns that we might see. Okay. Anything else that we have?
So Jason, I know you mentioned hot surfaces as far as those manhole covers. What about adjacent play structures, slides, and things like that?
Oh yeah, why don't you talk about that, Doug? I know that's a kind of a hot button that you've liked over the years.
So we've seen this in the past where we have a splash pad built just right next to a playground, you know, with climbers and slides and stuff like that. And it's a similar exposure to the hot manhole covers that Jason was talking about. Because especially the slides on these play structures, even if they're plastic slides, they can get really hot, you know, in, you know, June, July, August, especially if they're a darker color, if they're, you know, blue, green, brown, you know, they can get 100 and I've tested them where they were like 170 degrees. And even the yellow ones, which are probably the best color, can still get pretty hot. And then kids go from the splash pad to the play structure and slide down the slides in their bathing suits with their bare legs. And it's another area where we've seen some severe burns on the kids' legs because it's just too easy to go from the splash pad to this other structure where, you know, they need to cover up a little bit more before they're playing on those play structures.
So how do we go about dealing with that? You know, that's something in our design phase, we may want to put some distance between those so they're not that adjacent, so we have that issue. Other than that, what can we do? And this is something we should be thinking about as we're installing new playground structures and really evaluating what we have, is putting in shade structures over those playgrounds. And if you're putting in a new playground, I you know, unless you have good shade trees in the area around there, I would seriously consider shade structures. And we're seeing that as kind of becoming the standard as we go forward. Does that about cover what you were thinking, Doug?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, you could possibly have some sort of a, you know, some landscaping or a low fence or something in between the two structures that make direct access a little more difficult.
Yeah, and one really simple thing for the hot playground equipment is how do we orient it in direction with the sun. If I can put that slippery slide, which is one of the worst offenders that we have, if I can direct it to the north, it probably won't be as hot as if I had that slide directed to the south. So great, good point there. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I've gone a little longer than I intended on that, but please feel free to give us a call, and don't hesitate to ask us questions or ask your health department, ask the suppliers of the equipment, and let's make it safe for these kiddos out there so they can have a fun summer and not have any of those injuries. All right, thanks folks. Go out and have a safe day.